We're going to be back in just a moment to look at how we operationalize all of this data. But first, here's a message from me. If you're a part of a line of business, your main fear is disruption. You know data is the new gold and can create huge amounts of value. So does your competition, and they may be beating you to it. You're convinced there are new business models and revenue sources hidden in all the data. You just need to figure out how to leverage it. But with the scarcity of data scientists, you really can't rely solely on them. You need to be more people throughout the organization that have the ability to extract value from data. And as a data science leader or data scientist, you have a lot of the same concerns. You spend way too much time looking for, prepping, and interpreting data and waiting for models to train. You know you need to operationalize the work you do to provide business value faster. What you want is an easier way to do data prep and rapidly build models that can be easily deployed, monitored, and automatically updated. So whether you're a data scientist, data science leader, or in a line of business, what's the solution? What'll it take to transform the way you work? That's what we're going to explore next. All right, now it's time to delve deeper into the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of operationalizing data science and creating a data-driven culture. How do you actually do that? Well, that's what these experts are here to share with us. I'm joined by Nir Kaldero, who's head of data science at Galvanize, which is an education and training organization. Tricia Wang, who is co-founder of Sudden Compass, a consultancy that helps companies understand people with data. And last but certainly not least, Michael Lee, founder and CEO of Data Incubator, which is a data science training company. All right, guys, shall we get right to it?
All right.
So, data explosion happening right now, and we are seeing it across the board. I mean, I just shared an example of how it's impacting my philanthropic work in pediatric cancer, but you guys each have so many unique roles in your business life. How are you seeing it just blow up in your fields?
Yeah, for example, like at Galvanize, we train mainly Fortune 500 companies, and just by looking at the demand of companies that wants us to help them go through this digital transformation, it's mind-blowing data point by itself.
Okay. Well, we're seeing what's going on is that data science, like as the theme is that it's actually for everyone now. But what's happening is that it's actually meeting non-technical people. But what we're seeing is that when non-technical people are implementing these tools or coming at these tools without a baseline of data literacy, they're oftentimes using it in ways that distance themselves from the customer because they're implementing data science tools without a clear purpose, without a clear problem. And so what we do at Sudden Compass is that we work with companies to help them embrace and understand the complexity of their customers, because oftentimes they're misusing data science to try and flatten their understanding of the customer, as if you can just do more traditional marketing where you're putting people into boxes. And I think the whole ROI of data is that you can now understand people's relationships at a much more complex level at a greater scale before. But we have to do this with basic data literacy, and this has to involve technical and non-technical people.
Well, you can have all the data in the world, and I think it speaks to, if you're not doing the proper movement with it, forget it. It means nothing at the same time.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that when you look at the huge explosion in data, that comes with it a huge explosion in data experts, right? We call them data scientists, data analysts. And sometimes they're people who are very, very talented, like the people here. But sometimes you have people who are maybe rebranding themselves, right? Trying to move up their title one notch to try to attract that higher salary. And I think that that's one of the things that customers are coming to us for, right? They're saying, hey, look, there are a lot of people that call themselves data scientists, but we can't really distinguish. So we sort of run a fellowship, and we help companies hire from a really talented group of folks who are sort of truly data scientists and who know all those kind of really important data science tools. And we also help companies internally, Fortune 500 companies who are looking to grow that data science practice that they have. And we help clients like McKinsey, BCG, Bain train up their their workers to be more data talented and to build up that data science capabilities.
And Nir, this is something you work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. And when we were speaking earlier, you were saying many of these companies can be in a panic.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah, so not all Fortune 500 companies are fully data-driven. And we know that the winners in this fourth industrial revolution, which I like to call the machine intelligence revolution, will be companies who navigate and transform their organization to unlock the power of data science and machine learning. And the companies that are not like that, or not utilize data science and predictive power well, will pretty much get shredded. So they are in panic.
Tricia, companies have to deal with data behind the firewall and in the new multi-cloud world. How do organizations start to become driven right to the core?
I think the most urgent question to become data-driven that companies should be asking is, how do I bring the complex reality that our customers are experiencing on the ground into the corporate office, into the data models? So that question is critical because that's how you actually prevent any big data disasters, and that's how you leverage big data. Because when your data models are really far from your human models, that's when you're going to do things that are really far off from how, it's going to not feel right. That's when Tesco had their, terrible, big data disaster that they're still recovering from. And so that's why I think it's really important to understand that when you implement big data, you have to further embrace thick data, the qualitative, the emotional stuff that is difficult to quantify. But then comes the difficult art and science that I think is the next level of data science, which is that getting non-technical and technical people together to ask, how do we find those unknown nuggets of insights that are difficult to quantify? Then how do we do the next step of figuring out how do you mathematically scale those insights into a data model so that it actually is reflective of human understanding, and then we can start making decisions at scale. But you have to have that first.
That's absolutely right. And I think that when we think about what it means to be a data scientist, right, I always think about it in these sort of three pillars. You have the math side, right? You have to have that kind of stats, hardcore machine learning kind of background, right? You have the programming side. You don't work with small amounts of data, you work with large amounts of data. You got to be able to type the code to make those computers run. But then the last part is that human element, right? You have to understand the domain expertise. You have to understand what it is that I'm actually analyzing, what's the business proposition, and how are the clients, how are the users actually interacting with the system, right? That human element that you were talking about. And I think having somebody who understands all of those, and not just in isolation, but is able to marry that understanding across those different topics, that's what makes a data scientist.
But I find that we don't have people with those skill sets. And right now, the way I see teams being set up inside companies is that they're creating these isolated, data unicorns, that these data scientists have graduated from your programs, which are great, but they don't involve the people who are the domain experts. They don't involve the designers, the consumer insight people, the sales people, the people who spend time with the customers day in, day out. Somehow they're left out of the room. They're consulted, but they're not a stakeholder.
And can I actually give a quick example? So, for example, we at Galvanize train the executives and the managers, and then the technical people, the data scientists and the analysts. But in order to actually see all the ROI behind the data, you also have to create a fluid conversation between non-technical and technical people. And this is a major trend now. There's a major gap. We need to increase awareness and kind of create a new kind of environment where technical people also talk seamlessly with non-technical ones.
And that's one of the things that we see a lot, right? It's one of the trends in data science training is it's not just for the data science technical experts, right? It's not just for one type of person. So a lot of the training we do is sort of data engineers, people who are more on the software engineering side, learning more about the stats and math. And then people who are sort of traditionally on the stats side, learning more about the engineering. And then managers and people who are data analysts, learning about both.
Michael, I think you said something that was of interest too, because I think we can look at IBM Watson as an example in working in healthcare, the human component. Because oftentimes we talk about machine learning and AI and data, and you get worried that you still need that human component, especially in a world of healthcare. And I think that's a very strong point when it comes to the data analysis side. Is there any particular example you can speak to of that?
So, I think that there was this really excellent paper a while ago talking about a lot of the neural nets that have been trained on textual data, so looking at sort of different corpuses, and they found that these models were highly, highly sexist, right? They would read these corpuses, and it's not because neural nets themselves are sexist. It's because they're reading the things that we write, and it turns out that we write kind of sexist things. And they would sort of find all these patterns in there that were sort of latent, that had a lot of sort of things that maybe we would cringe at if we sort of saw. And I think that's one of the really important aspects of the human element, right? It's being able to come in and sort of say okay, I know what the biases of the systems are. I know what the biases of the tools are. I need to figure out how to use that to make the tools make the world a better place. And another area where this comes up all the time is lending, right? So the federal government has said, and we have a lot of clients in the financial services space, the federal government, so they're constantly under these kind of rules that they can't make discriminatory lending practices based on a whole set of protected categories, race, sex, gender, things like that. But it's very easy when you train a model on credit scores to pick that up, right? And then to have a model that's inadvertently sexist or racist. And that's where you need the human element to come back in and say, like, okay, look, you're using, the classic example would be zip code, right? You're using zip code as a variable. But when you look at it, zip code is actually highly correlated with race, and you can't do that. So you may inadvertently, by sort of following the math and being a little naive about the problem, inadvertently introduce something really horrible into a model. And that's where you need a human element to sort of step in and say, okay, hold on, slow things down. This isn't the right way to go.
And the
Tricia, I
people
feel
who
like I can feel her ready to
Yes,
respond.
I'm ready.
She's like, let me have at it.
And the people, here it is. And the people who are really great at providing that human intelligence are social scientists. We are trained to look for bias and to understand bias in data, whether it's quantitative or qualitative. And I really think that we're going to have less of these kind of problems if we had more integrated teams. If it was a mandate from leadership to say no data science team should be without a social scientist or ethnographer or qualitative researcher of some kind to be able to help see these biases.
The talent piece is actually the most crucial
Yeah.
one here. If you look about how to enable machine intelligence in organization, there are the pillars that I have in my head, which is the culture, the talent, and the technology infrastructure. And I believe, and I saw in working very closely with the Fortune 100 and 200 companies, that the talent piece is actually the most important, crucial, hard to get.
I totally agree.
Absolutely true. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's sort of like how we came up with our business model. Companies are basically saying, hey, I can't hire data scientists. And so we have a fellowship where we get 2,000 applicants each quarter. We take the top 2%, and then we sort of train them up, and we work with hiring companies who then want to hire from that population, right? So we're sort of helping them solve that problem. And the other half of it is really around training. Because with a lot of industries, especially if you're sort of in a more regulated industry, there's a lot of nuances to what you're doing. And the fastest way to develop that data science or AI talent may not necessarily be to hire folks who are coming out of a PhD program. It may be to take folks internally who have a lot of that domain knowledge that you have and get them trained up on those data science techniques. So we've had large insurance companies come to us and say, hey, look, we hire 3 or 4 folks from you a quarter. That doesn't move the needle for us. What we really need is take the 1,000 actuaries and statisticians that we have and get all of them trained up to become a data scientist and become data literate in this new open source world.
And
Go ahead, Dave.
sorry, ladies first.
Go ahead.
Are you sure?
No, please,
Fine.
men first.
I'm kidding.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Nir.
This is actually a trend that we have been seeing in the past year or so, that companies kind of like start to look how to upskill and look for talent within the organization, so they can actually move them to become more data literates and navigate them from analyst to data scientist and from data scientist to machine learner. So this is actually a trend that is happening already for a year or so.
Yeah, but I also find that after they've gone through that training and getting people skilled up in data science, the next problem that I get is executives coming to say, we've invested in all of this. We're still not moving the needle. We've already invested in the right tools. We've gotten the right skills. We have enough scale of people who have these skills. Why are we not moving the needle? And what I explain to them is, look, you're still making decisions in the same way, and you're still not involving enough of the non-technical people, especially from marketing, which is now, CMOs are much more responsible for driving growth in their companies now. But oftentimes, it's so hard to change the old way of marketing, which is still like very segmentation, demographic, variable-based. And we're trying to move people to say, no, you have to understand the complexity of customers and not put them in boxes.
And I think underlying a lot of this discussion is this question of culture, right? How do you build a data-driven culture?
Absolutely.
And I think that culture question, one of the ways it sort of comes up quite often in, especially in large Fortune 500 enterprises, is that they're not very comfortable with, for example, open source architecture, right? Open source tools. And there's sort of some sort of residual bias that that's somehow dangerous or is a security vulnerability. And I think that that's part of the cultural challenge that they often have in terms of how do I build a more data-driven organization? Well, a lot of the talent really wants to use these kind of tools. And I mean, just to give you an example, we are partnering with one of the major cloud providers to sort of help make open source tools more user-friendly on their platform, right? So trying to help them attract the best technologists to use their platform because they want and they understand the value of having that kind of open source technology work seamlessly on their platforms. So I think that just sort of goes to show you how important open source is in this movement and how much large companies and Fortune 500 companies and a lot of the ones we work with have to embrace that.
Yeah, and I'm seeing it in our work, even when we're working with Fortune 500 companies, is that they've already gone through the first phase of data science where I explained it was all about the tools and getting the right tools and architecture in place. And then companies started moving into getting the right skill set in place, getting the right talent. And what you're talking about with culture is really where I think we're talking about the third phase of data science, which is looking at communication of these technical frameworks so that we can get non-technical people really comfortable in the same room with data scientists. That is going to be the phase, that's really where I see the pain point, and that's why at Sudden Compass we're really dedicated to working with, I think, each other to figure out how do we solve this problem now.
And I think that communication between the technical stakeholders and management and leadership, that's a very critical piece of this, right? Like you can't have a successful data science organization without that.
Absolutely.
And I think that actually some of the most popular trainings we've had recently are from managers and executives who are looking to say, like, how do I become more data savvy, right? How do I figure out what is this data science thing and how do I communicate with my data scientists?
You guys made this way too easy. I was just going to get some popcorn and watch it play out. Nir, last 30 seconds. I want to leave you with the opportunity to anything you want to add to this conversation.
I think, one thing to conclude is to say that companies that are not data-driven, it's about time to hit refresh and figure out how they transition and, the organization to become data-driven, to become agile and nimble so they can actually see all the opportunities from this fourth industrial revolution. Otherwise, unfortunately, they will have a hard time to survive.
All agreed.
Yeah. Absolutely, you're right.
Michael, Trish, Nir, thank you so much. Fascinating discussion. And thank you guys again for joining us. We will be right back with another great demo right after this.
Thank you, Katie.